Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you might be dialing in from the world. We'll give everyone a few minutes to stream in and join us over time on this webinar today. But thank you so much in advance for joining us. Just to see, do a bit of check. So I guess since there's a little bit of time before everybody comes in, oh, it's 10. It's at least for me in Singapore, it's 10 a.m. sharp, and it's going to be 3 p.m. sharp for you guys in New Zealand as well. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping before I pass the floor over to our lovely Marcus. So please do check your audio if you can hear me well and can see us perfectly clear. If you can't, I would recommend just exiting and coming back in. It typically works. And if any questions, please feel free to click on the Q&A box at the bottom to just drop us some comments straight to us, the panelists or the host, that we can take on later on in the webinar. So please make sure that please do note this webinar has been recorded, so you can always check out the recording a few days after. We'll be sending you an email with the recording as well as some other really useful resources. Okay, so a little bit about today's webinar is that we have our very amazing Marcus Harvey here, who's going to be going through a little bit about adapting to change, the future of digital resources in academic libraries. So it's a super exciting topic, and about how libraries can adapt to changes in this rapidly changing environment, the past use of accelerated digital transformation so much, and how he was able to really like pull the reins and make sure that everything happens and pull everything smoothly across. So I'm just upselling him over here. But oh, hey, I see from Washington. Wow, thanks for calling in. It must be really, really early, late, I guess, for you. But thank you so much for calling. Okay, so what we will do is, there we go. Sorry, technical issues, wasn't responding for a bit. So a little bit, Marcus knows. So a little bit of introduction over here before we actually officially get started is that I'm Geraldine. Nice to see everybody. I'm a marketing manager over at Sage Asia Pacific, and I am super excited to be able to introduce to you the amazing Marcus Harvey, who is the manager of academic engagement over at the Victoria University of Wellington. I'm so sorry. I'll pass over to Marcus right now.
Kia ora, Geraldine. Kia ora, tēnā koutou everyone. Ko Marcus Harvey tōku ingoa, I mahi ana au ki te pātaka kororo o te Herenga Waka. Reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, welcome everybody. Thank you, Geraldine, for this opportunity. As mentioned, I'm the manager of the library's academic engagement team at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. I've been at the university for approximately 11 years, mostly in very similar roles to what I find I'm in now, covering both learning and teaching and research side of things. So hopefully today I give a good overview of how the university has incorporated, used, responded to challenges, and used the resources that we'll highlight today. Thank you.
Great. Okay, there we go. Okay, so just a little bit about before we officially kick in. So chatting out about Sage Catalyst, that we will discuss among the topics how the collection supports teaching and learning at the institutions. Before diving into discussion, like a quick overview of the product so that you guys get a little bit of familiarity about what Sage Catalyst is about and how it can actually help deepen student engagement. So the collection includes Sage Premium's eTextbooks curated from a wide range of social science curriculum and the most widely taught courses. So as a leading social science publisher, Sage textbooks are rich in pedagogy, international facing, and designed to engage students across all levels of curriculum. And we designed to meet the demands of a hybrid classroom, offering a full suite of study skills and tools on any device to increase student engagement, which is increasingly important and paramount in today's society. And if any questions, as I said, feel free to pop it in the Q&A box right below. You can pop a question over to Marcus, to myself, and we can answer them if we have the time at the end of the session to get to them. So I'm going to pass it over again to Marcus.
Kia ora, Geraldine. So today we'll provide an overview and we'll work through each of these themes. But just starting off, we'll look at the shifting to digital resources. in higher education specifically. We'll look at providing library resources in challenging times, and many of us have experiences of those in different forms. Obviously, the pandemic is one of those that is front and center, but not the only one. Digital tools and their impacts on students and faculties. So, just examining um, those changes these products have made, and then we'll look at the new and innovative ways to increase student engagement. Again, off the back of quite a few challenges that we've had, but just different strategies, different tool sets. So we'll dive into that. And then, of course, as everybody wants to know, what's the future? And that's a great question. And that's one which we can explore multiple pathways. And I'm looking forward to that part in particular. And obviously, AI is very much part of people's thoughts around what
Oh,
the future holds.
that's the part that Marcus gets to be a crystal ball and tells us his foresight. But before we dive in, so in the past few years, we have seen a lot of changes happening in higher education, and one of the shifts was digital resources. So I really want to hear about your journey when you're mentioning just now about like difficult times. I'm sorry, that's for later on, but like your journey in the university. Do you remember why you got interested in a product like Sage Catalyst, like a digital e-textbooks, and what kind of solution it provided for you?
Sure. Um, I've always been incredibly interested in digital resources. I'd like to think that I was a reasonable early adopter for a lot of those. I've mentioned I've been at Victoria University Te Herenga Waka for 11 years, but even before that, I was very early into adopting ebooks into other collections that I was working with. Um, I was sort of one of the casting my mind back into the 1990s, one of the early adopters of CD-ROMs and database material, and so I've always been
Wow.
part of that shift. I'm not a I want to see what those opportunities are, and I can certainly see a lot of resourcing benefits to those, and these kinds of resources often solve particular challenges we're dealing with in particular organizations. So referencing Sage Catalyst, what we're looking for is that flexibility. We're looking for value for money, obviously, and we'll delve into some of these themes further on as well. Um, but what I can say is from well, over all of these years, nothing obviously stays static. There are massive changes to how universities are both structured, the cohorts that are coming through societal pressures, and the resources reflect a lot of those pressures. And so we're constantly responding on that
Interesting.
basis. Yeah.
You
Uh,
mentioned societal pressures. Could you share us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you think about higher education, universities, and I'm sure Aotearoa New Zealand is not unique in reflecting those changes, but the changing cohort of students,
Hmm.
um, the cost pressures to attend higher education and university,
Yeah.
and the downstream effects that that has, the changes to disciplines
Mm.
we have been in an environment and continue to be in an environment where the humanities have had their challenges. We've
Yeah.
seen programs change quite dramatically here at the university. And so,
Yeah.
of course, we've had to respond and have a collection that reflects those
Mm.
changes, made with due care and attention, making sure that we are still providing an environment that is set up for the future, that we're not making decisions that, of course, we come to regret later. But certainly looking forward to the future, um, changing programs will mean that we have to buy additional resources or look at additional resources. We have to support cohorts that aren't necessarily fully on campus like they used to be. So we're
Mm.
moving into a more flexible environment. We're wanting options, I guess. And, certainly from the days of a print collection,
Yeah.
those options were increasingly limited to respond to those needs. So that's the situation we find. Those societal pressures, we're in a very financially constrained, and we'll talk about that later too. But we are in a constrained environment, not just within the university, but people's own pressures around housing costs and things like that. And all of those influence decisions around higher learning and their preparation for learning in challenging environments and their ability to absorb uh, and work with information and be
Hmm.
part of a university program. Uh,
Wow, I
the,
think
the
it's
idea
amazing.
the idea that you were just at university and you could lock yourself off
Uh, that doesn't
just
exist anymore, does it?
doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. No, no. And increasingly too, I would say for our Indigenous communities in Māori and Pacifica in particular, there are a
Hmm.
lot of demands, and as which is fantastic in terms of having we're seeing that cohort increase in numbers
Yeah.
year on year, but there's a lot of pressures there as well within community and expectations that we're having to work through. Often in the first, for the first time, a lot of
Hmm.
first family coming through as well
Right.
for studying, and so there's a lot of prep work required to,
I'm sure.
it's
Yeah.
that introduction to university life, basically.
And it sounds like a lot of uncharted territories that you're dealing with because it's also dynamically changing and you don't know what's next. You just really like trying to react and cope with the changes in a sense.
To some degree, I do find that for some things, there are themes that have emerged over years. You're right. I think the issues sometimes, if we cut right down to the chase, are similar issues. It's just we have different tools to deal with them over time.
Hmm.
So I think we had collection pressures and study pressures and all sorts of issues, when I first started in my career. It's just we can solve them in different ways and quicker normally.
I'm gonna be like a little bit flexible in this sense because I just saw a really interesting question from Washington that seems to be in line with whatever you just mentioned. So like you mentioned when you look at the different programs, would you say in your context there are inconsistencies in the adoption, perceptions, and the use of digital resources?
Well, I can answer that with a yes. That's the quick answer.
Easy done.
um, so that's an easy one. Look, what I would say is the needs across programs are diverse. Regardless of digital resources. Just there are pedagogical differences. There are definitely differences in terms of the resources we provide. There's differences in terms of the subject librarian expertise that my team can provide, the research expertise my team can provide. And then, of course, we have just the individual, as we call them here, course coordinators. So those who are engaging in the lecturing and the learning and teaching process, course coordinators, there's such a huge variability across that cohort that even within a particular program or a school or a faculty, um, there are a tremendous range of ways of um, both teaching, yeah, and the perception and their perceptions of digital resources will often flow through to their particular student cohort as well. So I definitely have stories of particular areas in the university who are more resistant because actually it tends to be that particular discipline
Mhm. Makes sense.
is wedded to might be wedded to books, print, whatever it happens to be. So it's a harder time to to work with
That's
in
brilliant.
some cases. Yeah.
Well, I hope you answer your question. Yeah, you're welcome, Washington. So, conscious of time, I'm gonna jump on to the next question. Okay.
Thank you.
So, I'd like to discuss whether your library has faced any particular. Oh, wait, hold on. Did I just jump another one? Ah, yes, past challenges. Correct. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Whether your library faced any challenges in the past, and whether like having an e-textbook collection or an e-first strategy actually has helped you cope and thrive in these kind of situations.
Absolutely. What I would say too is sometimes it felt like surviving rather than thriving, and I'll go into why that might be. But I think I think coming out of it has definitely been, um, on reflection, it has given us the opportunity to thrive. So the challenges that we're particularly faced with here, um, for those who know Wellington, Aotearoa, we're challenged with a range of threats like earthquakes, um,
Much like Japan.
flooding, yeah, exactly. So look, that is front and center. What I would say is from the moment I arrived here 11 years ago, we have had an e-first strategy. And we have a fantastic team here in the library who helps implement that strategy through our resources and acquisitions team. So, what that means is we are always trying to buy digital resources first. Um, we go out of our way to find out what those options are. And part of that is because of geography, geolocation. So in 2016, we had a major earthquake that fortunately wasn't directly in Wellington, but it was close enough to severely disrupt the city, and I would say even now still disrupts Wellington just because of rebuilding buildings, and the financial impact of that, not just to the university but to the city,
So
and New Zealand.
sorry.
No, that's look, and poor Christchurch had a harder time in 2011 as well, and that was tragic, and so there had been some lessons learned, but of course, we went through, on a much more minor scale, I have to say, but it was still incredibly disruptive.
Yeah.
And without, so 2016, it happened in November, and it happened on a Monday, and that was the first day of our trimester for the summer period.
Oh my goodness,
So,
timing. Yeah.
so timing,
Yeah.
absolutely timing. Oh, I was almost going to use the word perfect, but clearly that's wrong. Um, but from a learning and teaching perspective and a preparation perspective, while we had to close buildings and we had to very quickly work from home, and remembering, this is still 4 years before the pandemic, and you know how much the tools had to change over that time. But
Mm.
without having an e-first strategy, without having a large electronic textbook collection, we had just implemented for the first time a comprehensive reading list platform, which helped manage reading lists and also copyright. But that meant because we'd had this project, we faced that moment absolutely prepared to have as much as possible online. Without
Wow.
all of those stars aligning, I don't know how we would have coped. So it
Incredible
certainly
foresight.
highlighted, yeah, it absolutely highlighted to us. And what I would say is libraries are central services. We have a helicopter view, and I think it's a blessing and a curse because because we have that helicopter view, we often have to take strategic decisions. And of course, at a localized individual level, that can often be hard. And that is our challenge in terms of managing relationships and bringing people along on that journey. So I
Mm.
often reflect back to those times and I try to look at that bigger picture. And I think that that's our value as libraries, is having to make hard calls and saying, look, I understand, and certainly historically and even personally,
Yeah.
the value we place on printed information can still be very, very important to us. However, I know that on balance, and as we moved from earthquake to pandemic, and then unfortunately because of the societal pressures that put on the community, we ended up into protest, and we're a capital city, so we
Oh,
had a lot of disruption because of um, community-wide protest and locking down of precincts of the city, um,
goodness. Yeah.
which of course affected our ability to get into our physical collections, certainly in those locations. So again, without e-textbooks, e-first journal articles, we would not have functioned. I'll be as blunt as that.
I really think it's incredible how, be it luck or be it foresight, when
Yeah.
it was an E-first strategy, it clearly proved to be like a life raft, I would say, when you
Mm.
guys were like thrown into the storm and everything. And I really appreciated how you clearly had so much empathy and kindness towards people, not just for the sake of education, but also like as people and as a species, I would say, that we have to, in a sense, look forward and know how to progress. And e-textbooks is not just to replace print, actually it's more complementary, and how we can work together to move forward. There's a really good one by e-first, like, does the e-first strategy prove to be effective for postgraduate programs where you might have considerably significant numbers of the older generation who aren't so digitally savvy?
I think we make assumptions that even the students coming through are digital natives, digital savvy cohorts. Um, I think it comes back to even that earlier question around, that inconsistency of programs. Some programs are definitely more prepared. Um, we have distance cohorts now. I think the question rightly points out the older cohorts in terms of we have returning postgraduates who may have been out of study for a long, long time, but we have to take care and attention, and we have to make sure that we're checking in and providing support where necessary. But I'm equally wary of making the assumption that they're older because
Yeah,
you know they could be
stereotyping. Yeah,
younger. We're still talking about 18-year-olds who are finishing high school, coming to university for the first time, may have had very, very limited resources, regardless,
that
and
is
in their
true.
high school
Yes,
setting. And so we have to be prepared for guiding people through that process, no matter what their age. We
you're
have a lot
right.
of we have a lot of visiting researchers, scholars. We have to check in as well because there are different levels of resourcing, again, across the planet. And New Zealand's certainly not the best resourced, but certainly comparable to most other sort of immediately Pacifica nations. We have a higher level of resourcing around e-material.
Yeah, I think like because our world, as we're getting increasingly globalized, we also have to realize that to be inclusive and truly understand the different kinds of, I would say, as you were saying, it's not just linked to age, it's also a culture, part of the world you're at, of the technological, I would say, familiarity that you have. The good news, I just can't resist but to insert this, is that Catalyst has a whole bunch of resources that will teach you how to use it, like be it manuals and videos and so on and so forth. But before I steal a show from Marcus, let's pop on to the next question.
Thanks, Geraldine.
All right. So on the topic of resilience, and it's also something that a few of the comments raised up that they were saying that you mentioned about the COVID-19, all these like earthquakes, so on and so forth, right? Economic challenges is actually a very real reality, especially for many libraries, right? So it can be difficult to decide how to cope in these times when it's you have to provide the right resources to faculty and to students while still staying like forward thinking and improving the library. So how do you make this happen?
Sure. So again, I'll make a plug for our teams across the library. We have a collection development committee, and that has been at the core of those developments and those discussions. We are constantly analyzing the collection. We are constantly analyzing the spend, the cost per use, value for money proposition, as we call it. And we're having positive conversations with academics around what they're using and what uh, we need to balance in the future. Uh, and then equally, we're having hard conversations with academics and programs and faculties and the university about what resources we can afford or what we might have to change, what we might have to stop doing. So, what I would say is those conversations happen every day, right through the year. We're going through cycles. And the university has its challenges or has its not just challenges, but has its successes as well. And so it swings and roundabouts. We've been in constrained times before. We have been in times of plenty before. And it's just making sure that we're kind of sticking to, I guess, the essentials, the nice to haves, but knowing where those flexible points are at all
Yeah.
times. Yeah. And
Like
so that
prioritization, right?
basically it's to cut to the chase, prioritizing. Um, Knowing very carefully or at a detailed level of what our spend are and where our room to maneuver is in that budget. And the library is
Yeah.
just part of a bigger, um, it is governed by both governmental, and again, this is where that societal pressure comes in, but also at
Mm.
the university level and depending on student numbers, for example.
Oh, yes,
Uh,
that's important. Yes.
being able to respond to what that looks like. And of course, that is only known, um, you know, up to a trimester, or for us, the big one is before trimester one, which is coming into the end of February. So those periods, that can have a huge influence on how the library is placed for the next year. Yeah.
Do you think that like with the fairly recent COVID-19 and all the pandemic, post-pandemic effects, so on and so forth, has these challenges changed in any way? Has it gotten more challenging or less challenging for librarians?
That's a good question. My first instinct is saying, well, yes, there have been times where those conversations have been easier because people understand the bigger picture.
Mm,
They're not. I'm not saying 100%, but certainly we saw a lot of change during the pandemic. A lot of things had to happen quite quickly,
yeah.
um, and we proved universities have their own bureaucracies, their own pace at doing things, and we proved we could do things faster if we had to.
Yay.
And conversations that may have been difficult became conversations of necessity rather than
Mm,
conversations of deficit. Um, and I mean, I think the pendulum swung back to the old days to some degree.
mm,
But I think there's still a kernel in there where people are more willing to have those conversations because they know what the environment is like. And if we're
yeah.
honest and if we're transparent about what we do, we're not
Yeah.
making changes to databases or textbook platforms to say, look, um, or it changes tomorrow and we've done no prep work, no comms. We're
Yeah, that'll
making
be
sure,
hard.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We're making sure we're engaging with our communities around anything that we do.
That's super nice. So when it comes to something like, I guess, for COVID-19 versus just like you're mentioning the, I would say the one on Christchurch or the earthquakes, would you say that because of COVID-19, when we as like a global pandemic, that these changes became, I would say, easier for you because you were already kind of ready in that sense. You were already first and you were ready to take on.
And I think that's what that's the power of libraries or any central service. We have to strategize. Although there is that good saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, which basically means that how you and I conduct ourselves, how society conducts itself. You can have the best of strategy, but at the end of the day, it is the people. So,
Yes.
and they will respond in ways. I think we've seen things where large social media platforms have tried to introduce um, new features. There has been things like virtual reality, virtual communities, and all sorts of things that have been tried. They thought it was the right time. They've had grand strategies of implementing things, but society just wasn't there. We weren't interested. And I
Yeah, you
think
never know. Yeah.
you never know. So that's where culture eats strategy for breakfast. Um, I think, like in terms of bringing New Zealand, Aotearoa into the equation, we are down the bottom of the world. And one of the things that we saw was, we had a lovely campus bookshop which had to close up uh, in phases, and that was sad to see. But it there was a logic to why it was closing and why it was closing then.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
no matter what we personally thought about that, um, and there has been a replacement for that. service. The university needed something, but I can see that even that is struggling. And I think why that is we couldn't get print material into the country anyway. Who's going to ship it? You've got a global pandemic. The last thing that needs to go between countries is a box of books, to be brutally frank. And we've seen
Yes. Prioritization.
exactly. And the cost of freight has gone up tremendously.
Yeah.
We're not, and I would hate to think what it is like for our, more established colleagues in countries that are on large international supply lines like Asia, like the Americas, like Europe.
Mm.
Um, we're an afterthought in terms of getting things here. And so we have to go to something like an e-textbook because what's the alternative?
Terribly self-deprecating, but very, but really objective. I'm just, but yeah,
you know, I mean, it's
librarians
just
are
it's a
amazing. Yeah.
reality. It's a reality. We have to have electronic material if we're to provide a service that is both
Mm.
timely and equitable and um, yeah, and affordable.
Oh, for sure. I mean, affordable is always a plus, regardless of times. Well, but very much linking to how like you were saying that things change and prioritization, there's definitely a lot of impact as to how digital tools interact with
Mm,
students and faculty, right? So like, did they say anything to you or any like stories that you have of how they felt using digital tools over time
yeah,
has changed for them?
yeah. We run student surveys, and fortunately, we had one where the results came out quite recently. Collections were mentioned as part of that survey. The library, I'm sure, as many libraries, enjoy a relative high level of satisfaction overall for their services. So we found that that's pretty stable in terms of satisfaction, resourcing and services. Uh, we're finding some trend around the collection and resourcing minor shifts, but I will say it has gone down slightly. And I think what that is around access. And it has been flagged. I don't have any further details to share at a granular level, but I think at a high level, there are problems with access. Now, I think what that is, my gut reaction, it's about volume. So,
Hmm.
and the models. So we have large for us. We have large cohort classes. Let's be real. We have large cohort classes, and yeah. So what I mentioned is for those who are still assigning a print textbook as a required reading, that has to be
Yeah.
bought from the campus bookshop, and we run out of copies, or there is no digital alternative,
Mm.
or there's perhaps no library model for
Yeah.
that e-resource. That's where students are starting to complain about access. I was
Right.
I was hugely fortunate to be a student for the first time in many years this year, and it was quite an eye opener. We faced a situation where the library could only provide a print copy. Uh, it was only able to be purchased electronically on a personal basis, or a print copy. So the print
Oh.
copy had to come from overseas. And the e-copy had its benefits. It actually was pretty good. But what that meant was, and it's that whole last minute thing, students were still buying textbooks in. We managed to digitize a copy and have that on the reading lists, which was
Mm.
great. But it meant we were sort of weeks 1 or 2 or 3 in before everybody had what they should have had from day one.
It's always like that, right? Like I'm guilty
Exactly.
of it as well when I was in
Yeah,
university.
that's
Like
right.
I'll
That's
get
very,
my books day two.
yeah, yeah. And then I was working very, very closely with another language. It was another language course. I was doing a language course, but this was another language course, and they had an electronic copy, but it was so antiquated. So there was issues there about they hadn't kept up with the I guess their electronic platform. They hadn't kept up with the resource itself and the bells and whistles that that resource could have. Like there was no hyperlinking inside the resource. There was supposed to be audio files that played, but actually you could buy it as an ebook, but then you basically had to have a CD, DVD, or a CD-ROM. And of course,
Oh,
no student, no.
no.
I had to. Well, fortunately, we found something in the Copyright Act that meant that for a linguistics course, we could take the files off that CD. Um, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But we thought we were stumped there for a while, so you couldn't go from one to the other. So they have to be both innovative, flexible products at that level. And I think that that's where some of that student feedback comes. So I don't think it's a library issue. I think it's a
Product.
publishing issue, a product issue. I'll just say that it's a product issue.
Sorry. It's a product issue. Sage has done, I would say we've done a pretty good job so far. But to that point, I have to say that it's not like a very, I would say, confusing and frustrating experience for everybody on all fronts because not only does the student not get the content, but the faculty also feel a bit impaired with the students not having their books ready with them. But do you feel that um, the impact of such e-textbooks actually varies between students, let's say, that come from New Zealand versus those like international students that come from other parts of the world?
Yeah. The only direct experience I have at the moment to share a story at, and I don't know the cohort for that particular class, but we were recently using an engagement tool across our e-textbooks. It can also be applied to copyright compliant PDFs. And the level of engagement that we had through that product on our first use was incredible. So this allowed them to discuss, reflect. Now I know at a high level that that course does have quite a large international cohort. So that's why I'm making the connection, but I couldn't give you numbers and where from or anything like
No
that.
worries.
But it did increase engagement, and it was also tied into our learning management system as well. We're using Canvas here, so there was some analytics that were involved. Um, they could build some assessment around those readings, and I think the overall feeling was that it brought that class closer together actually through readings. Um,
Wow.
I mean, obviously you could have sat around the table, but that's increasingly difficult. But it actually it replicated that experience.
Interesting. It's
Yeah,
like a
in real
digital
time,
book club.
a digital book club. That's right. So those are the sorts of things that we're looking for to increase engagement. So that reading is not just a private experience; it is shared,
Mm.
as you would hope, that it's shared within the classroom uh, in a more engaging way, rather than I've set this text, who's read it? You know,
That's a question every faculty is asking in their heads. But that is so true. I think if you're able to absorb content, and there's like a community around it, right? And it all adds to the student experience. Like years to come after graduation, it's gonna be memories that will bring them through lives and then formulate who they are. But this is very in tune with our next question, actually. So you mentioned stuff about like student engagement and everything. So finding new and innovative ways to increase student engagement is becoming increasingly important, but also difficult in the digital age. So, do you feel that products like Catalyst helps to improve student engagement in any way?
yeah. I mean, in the case of Sage Catalyst, um, and again, I'll come back to the access model. One of the reasons we seriously looked at Catalyst was because it was solving that access issue. Um, so clearly, that's going to increase the student engagement. The fact that they don't have the frustration around access limited resources. Um, we have moved, unfortunately, in some cases, to models where it's a one, two, three simultaneous user model. That is obviously the least of our preferences, and Sage Catalyst allowed us to open that back up, and quite rightly so. Exactly, two thumbs up on that one. So certainly, and the proposition for us, it was quite a low barrier. I think it was at the stage we were looking at was there was six core textbooks is how we started off with that we just had to make a change. They were large used in large cohort classes. We had very limited user models, so we had to make a change. So that's a direct student engagement issue. Having tools, and I would love to see this more across the board. And it's and I know Sage is developing products in this area, but I'd like to see it with all publishers and all vendors is tools that are built in at a ground level around engagement. So not just reflecting in two thumbs up on a resource. I'm talking about true engagement and providing our course coordinators with the analytics that they can see the impact of those readings, either through assessment or some sort of analysis of engagement directly with the students. Um, sharing sharing tools.
Yeah.
We've come from those again who have been around for a long time. We just used to pass things around, pass articles around. What did you think of this? We may have been in work environments that have had some form of professional discussion built around readings. And so finding innovative ways, I think they're all inherently built around fundamental human needs. I don't think uh, nothing
We are
changes on that.
social creatures, actually.
We're social creatures at
Yeah.
heart, most of us. Um,
Yeah, most of us. Sorry, not a blanket statement.
um, sometimes so I say that because sometimes I'd love to,
Yeah, me too. Like, just leave me alone.
exactly. But they are still built on fundamental human behaviors. And okay, so we have a cohort coming through that engages in different ways.
Mm.
What we've seen is we have across the board, and since I monitored in 2016 and beyond, very low engagement in mobile devices, for example.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if it's different in different countries, but we were talking about low single digit percentages in terms of
Wow.
engagement with readings. I think just because it doesn't matter which mobile phone you get and they get bigger and bigger every year, the screen is still too small. Like there's a real world constraint.
Mm.
Maybe
Yeah.
the last thing that somebody wants to do with the phone, which is actually their entertainment tool,
Yes.
uh, is turn it into a work tool, to be
Yeah.
frank. So there seemed to be a very mature attitude in terms of, no, I'm going to use my laptop or, you know, Chromebook or whatever it happens to
That's
be
a thought.
to
Yeah.
engage with these products. So that's been quite consistent. So, you wouldn't put all your eggs into creating a beautiful mobile app experience. I would caution against that. um,
This
and
is so
and look for other
interesting. Yeah.
things. But often our response is, oh, that's what they need. They love their phone, digitally engaged. You know,
Well, once upon a time, people, I honestly forgot where and who, but they were saying that if we made things more accessible on mobile phones, students would actually be more interested to read the content. But I think you're spot on to say that while other apps like Amazon or even Netflix sees relatively high engagement on mobile phones, people do not want to engage with a mobile phone to read my textbook because I just don't, it's different. It's work and play kind of thing,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Which makes a lot
yeah.
of sense. But mm, other than like, I would say having it on a mobile phone, if clearly the mobile phone route didn't work out, how other ways do you think like student engagement can be driven, let's say like within the library compound?
Sure.
It's a
I
tricky
mean,
one, yeah.
it is a tricky one. I mean, it's what influence do we have as a library around the engagement itself? In the sense that we are traditional providers of information.
Yes.
We often have services wrapped around through something like a subject librarian, student liaison type service, and we certainly do our best in terms of having um, engaging presentations, workshops to students. We have seen massive change since the pandemic. Um, oh, I remember pre-pandemic, we'd run workshops, sessions for, we'd advertise them till the hilt. We would try to find every channel we could to say that this thing is happening, and we'd get three people, you know, and the potential was to get hundreds,
Oh no.
and that which is very demoralizing.
It,
Um, but now, you know, we ran one last year when we ran out of room in a lecture theatre. Um,
wow.
so when we ran it recently, we increased the size of the lecture theatre, and that was bursting at the seams.
Brilliant.
So the need for engagement has changed.
Hmm.
So we're talking here, I suppose, in this question about how do we increase student engagement, but quite often they are seeking something, and we've just
Hmm.
got to try and tap into what that is. And I guess post-pandemic, people were trying to get back to that human connection where they could. We had incredible, but and whatever way that happened, because we also had massive numbers on Zoom for the first time. So it was online and physically. So, you know, great to see. Um, but
Brilliant.
again, it was trying to like, why? Why did that
What?
happen? Why did that, but what did we do differently that, 2019 we were awful at, and then now it just happened? So it's, I don't know, is it us that have changed or the students or what? So, where does that lie?
That's hilarious. But I love how you're trying to change the perspective of things, right? It's not just about increasing anymore. It's about different ways, understanding that people change, the needs of change and everything. And I think students have changed drastically, and the demands and what they expect of institutions and faculty has also changed over the decades. But I'm also cautious of time. I know we can delve into this till the cows come home, quite literally. So um, you're mentioning about like how engagement is important, yes, but when it comes to the future of the library, how do you envision the future library will be like in terms of digital resources?
Yeah, this can take multiple paths. This is why I love this question, and where we'll delve into AI, and it is the crystal ball area. Um, and I'll have to rely on some, uh, I guess, prior history that many things change, but everything stays the same. You know, so
Oxymoron.
so what I mean by that is we have the internet, but we were still providing information. We still had a service, we still have core values within all of that. So I think in terms of digital resources, there are certain things that spring to mind with this question. One
Mm,
is open educational resources. We're certainly putting our attention towards supporting our researchers here to create OERs, as the abbreviation
mm,
is. And that solves some of those problems that I've said around, a textbook just doesn't exist, or it only exists in
mm,
print. And so, if that could be communally produced, so sometimes that is course coordinator working with other academic colleagues, sometimes it's working directly with the students, and that becomes part of the assessment process is to produce a resource that hasn't existed for the first time. So, Council of Australasian University Libraries is supporting an OER initiative, and we have a platform available to us. And so I've got a team here in the library who's supporting that publication process and working directly with academics as authors. So that's one trend that we've seen. We're seeing, obviously, with things like the read and publishing agreements, transformative agreements, changes to the scholarly publishing environment. Now I've seen changes. I've seen, when we moved to electronic journals, there was a lot of changes both to the number of publishers, and I guess pooling together of some of those smaller publishers into the larger companies that we see today. Um, some of those trends continue,
mhm.
but it was a trend I saw 25 years ago. Um, Moving towards gold open access, I think that's something that as a profession we just need to keep a watching brief on. There is concern here at the university. We're in a green open access environment. We're wanting post-Princeton to be deposited in our open access repository. But we are seeing, obviously article processing charges being applied now to what were previously peer-reviewed, normal scholarly outputs. They're moving to an open access model, but academics are expected to pay for the privilege of publishing.
Yes.
So we need to monitor that. Personally, I'm very concerned about that. They were already providing their product and their output and their intellectual capability it was out there, and they were providing it for free. Now they're expected to pay. We
Mm.
don't have the money to support that kind of shift. So we'll see where that goes. So that's in terms of digital resources. On the positive side, I think the more that we do see things like open models for engaging with textbooks, and if we do see more engagement tools built in, I think we're on a good path. Um, I think changes to the Copyright Act. New Zealand has not had an update. We were supposed to have one uh, before the pandemic. Obviously, that was put to one side, but we have a very limited Copyright Act compared to some jurisdictions around the use for learning and teaching that would influence how we can use materials. And I think so. So the future there, it's not just a publisher or sort of that international view. If we could make some small changes there, that would be a big win for students. Um, I think.
Do you feel that the role of a library would actually change drastically in the future?
I had an extreme view at one stage on that, where if the information is being given to publishers for free by academics, there is very little expected in terms of remuneration, or there is very little remuneration or no remuneration for that process. Um, so if the product, if the academic output is free in some sense, at what point, and let's say if it was given away for free in an open access environment, what is the role of the library? Now,
Mm.
the reason why I don't feel too despondent about that is we've always provided collections, but okay, let's say if that shifts, but we're probably about to segue into the AI question.
Yes.
And I think there are core values, both in the way that we analyze information, the way that we buy information, and the
Hmm.
way that we, through information literacy programs, convey the importance of information, authority of that information. I think that core remains. So that's why I'm
Hmm.
hopeful. I think the library profession is incredibly well set up
It
for the
is.
future on that basis. I had a marvelous a question at a learning and teaching meeting
Hmm.
recently
Share.
where people were debating
Yeah.
the impact of AI, and it was mostly academic. There was central services there, but it was mostly senior academics in roles around, associate deans for learning and teaching. And somebody said, in reference to AI, if only we had a team in the university who could guide students through the merits and the biases and the authority of information and set them up for both study and for the future in a world that's rapidly changing with misinformation, disinformation, and AI generated content on top of AI generated content.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was about 10 seconds left in the meeting, and I didn't have to put my hand up. But if that didn't sound like a plug for a library, I'm not sure what does.
Well, that's
And
a brilliant segue.
I don't know why we hadn't got through to this person, but historically, obviously, that's been an issue for that particular person. And I think, we need to have a conversation at some stage to bring them along and let them know what our role can be.
Well, thank you for the segue to as you were saying, the question about the AI. So this is our last question for today, actually, and we are right on time. So tell us your thoughts behind the place of artificial intelligence in the future of digital resources in libraries.
Yeah. And again, everything's so rapidly changing, but I think coming back to those core values. You know, I had to reflect on those recently in terms of our library association. So, Library and Information Association of New Zealand had a seminar, and coming back to those core values, which will be very similar across the planet,
Mm,
um, again puts us in a very good position, regardless of what those changes are. I go back to the things that I learned when I first went to library school. You know, how did we determine authority and bias? How do we determine, um, where dates were essential? What were the clues that we got from that particular piece of information? I use that when I'm, almost inherently. I mean, I use that when I'm looking at something on the web these days. You know,
mhm.
it looks wrong. I have a question. Like there's just a flag that goes up. I need to find out what the provenance of that is. So I think we're if we can convey that to the wider community and have our role um, strengthened uh, through us looking for opportunities.
Yeah.
Now, the resources themselves, certainly on the side of the collection, the way that we could analyze the collection, both for gaps, but also strengths,
Mhm.
marry that up to our programs. We all have course outlines.
Mhm.
You could, it may make that process a lot simpler in the future. Um, there have always been ways to analyze the collection, but if it could speed that process up, provide a better overview, provide better summaries to our leaders in terms
Yeah.
of influencing, provide better stories, that's great.
Mm,
So let's use those tools. Um, I think in terms of accessibility, that's an interesting one as well. So
mm.
for those who have some form of impairment, AI, I would hope, provides even better tools to access that content. Certainly in language translation, has provided an
Yes.
incredible benefit. And I think that's one important area as well. It can well open up material that has been previously inaccessible because of costs of translation. There are some incredible positives.
Yes.
What I like to say is always with eyes wide open. We go into these things, and I think the concerns that we have about AI are not library concerns; they are societal concerns. Again, this word about this important word, the society, where we're not in isolation, and the I guess the worries that we have, they have to be solved at a bigger level. We have to put a stake in the ground at particular times, and our
Mm.
profession is one of those ones that we have a voice, we have a
Yes.
ability to lobby.
Mm.
Uh, you know, Things can always go in directions that we don't expect. The
Mm.
internet that I first saw in 1995 is not the internet we have today.
No, it's not.
Well, it's not the internet I expected in 1995, and if it did, I
Yes.
suspect I might be on a beach and have a yacht. Um, so so I'm very wary about making predictions because I should, otherwise we'd be wealthy, and some are because they were better at predicting it than I am. So yeah, we've got to be, we have to be careful about
We
getting too
do.
far ahead of ourselves with predictions. Um, I think it's a very powerful tool. I think we will see big changes, but I would hope, and I don't think our values in libraries have probably changed in decades. Like at a core level.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
yeah,
But yeah, I think that it's really cool and how libraries also have this, I would say, role
yeah,
to educate children, sorry, like students on how
yeah,
to use AI and the ethical use of using AI and like plagiarism and everything like that. It's such a great area today. It's still
yeah.
so new, so a lot
And
of
we've
learning is still required. Mm.
Yeah, and we've been fortunate in our position to be able to feed into the policy updates. Some universities are further ahead or behind, and that doesn't matter. But we're all trying to respond as quickly as possible. So So trying to wrap a policy around all of this and what that means and how you engage with resources and what the expectations are of students in using AI that might be inherently built into these platforms. We're now seeing AI search tools, and these things are just released.
Yes.
Sometimes we might have a say, or
Mhm.
we might see a beta so we can provide feedback. But by and large, you know, you'll be confident certainly within, like a sage of, you've done that user testing and you've got that feedback and you're on pretty solid ground as you're moving forward. And so that's fine. Products change and products have always changed.
Yes.
And this is the same for AI. We're seeing those tools being integrated. We're seeing literature review capability being built into research platforms, and no doubt databases of the future. But what does that mean? And are we comfortable with that? And that is a pedagogical question in terms of how people are engaged on a learning and teaching basis. It is a societal question again. What are we how are we setting our students up for the future? I love metadata. I was a cataloger at one point, and so I've got a I appreciate metadata. I went in again another meeting, and we've spent 20 years trying to catalog photographs or digitize photographs, and we have vast archives of photographs. And I went into this meeting with one of our AI academics, and of course, you make fits and starts on these projects. You get a few thousand records in, and then the money dries up or the will dries up, and you get back to it in about 5 years' time, and half the metadata has disappeared because the database has changed, and nightmare stuff. He said to me, "Oh, I could go back to the office and I could probably generate an AI process in about 5 minutes, which could run across all of those photographs and do a basic level of description." So if you
Wow.
think of something like Google Photographs and you typed in cat, it will bring up all the photographs that have got a cat in them. You know, so
That's
you're not
good. Cats are good.
and that is a visual search. It's not looking at any metadata at all. It's somehow working out where all the pixels are and saying that's a cat. Fantastic. So,
Brilliant. Yeah.
so for photographic archives, if you can do a basic level of description that says photograph 1950, black and white, 5 people in a church, you know, uh,
You'll get some. Yeah.
we're we're taking something that took a generation
Yeah.
into a 5 minute process at a basic level, of which we will still go through and check and add further description. But
It's
that
just
will
so
only
much
get
faster.
but that will only get better.
Yeah. It just changes things entirely, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Marcus, I am really, I mean, we can go on for forever. We are at time. So, but and I do want to make sure that everybody is well, yeah, we have an hour, but thank you so much. And I feel that it's really brilliant how librarians and the library actually always play it like I always thought library was like a lighthouse of every school, right? It's always there. People sometimes take it for granted because it's not, but when it comes to like learning and everything, and the beacon, I would say, really comes from the library. So thank you so much for what you do and for your time today. I think that I'm going to just stop sharing my screen so you can see our face a little bit more clear. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed the time today. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to ping us. And we do have a survey at the end of this webinar. So at the time, please just drop 1 minute survey. But thank you so
Thanks,
much.
George.